Good evening, I'm Dr Seuss, and I'm an alcoholic.
To the grace of God and the program of AA and sponsorship, I haven't had a drink since the 10th of December, 1967, and for that I'm very grateful. I want to thank Morris and Popeye and the committee for the opportunity to be here this weekend. Week. This has been very cool. Not as many conferences include the spouses when you travel. So a lot of times when we travel out of expense and time, we travel alone. It's nice to be here with my wife. Linda, would you stand up and say hi? I like the energy in this room. Every place you go collectively, we have a collective conscious. And there's an energy in this room that is very positive, very warm. There's something very nice about this, and I like it. I love your seafood. I love everything about the experience I've had, so thank you. The talks this weekend, from Tuesday night on, from Susie and Watson, you can give fancier AA talks, but I don't know if you can give better ones. I was so touched Tuesday night to listen to those talks. I think they were, really terrific. All the speakers from Peter to Mark, Karen. I haven't heard Ed, but I'm looking forward to that. And then with Zelda and Beverly. Pete, I don't know if Pete remembers. When I was a young man, I heard Pete many times when I was in AA. I'm from Minnesota, and the Canadians, we had Tom B. and Max C. and Cecil and Terry P. and Tom Myers, and these guys were active. They were active in every element of AA that you could be. They were active in service, and they were active in sponsorship, and they gave AA talks. And they were our heroes. And in Minnesota, they kept traipsing through our place, and they were our models, and they were great guys. And they got worked as hard. They were workhorses, and it was terrific. So kind of what we're doing here tonight, I think, is we're kind of having a celebration. I think that's what conferences are. I think your committee is to be congratulated. They understand that we also need a little time for fellowship. There's really, the nice thing about this is the pace of this conference. That to get a little time to be with each other. And that's very cool. And I got a chance to be with other friends. There must be 100 people here this weekend that I know. And that's nice. So we're kind of making a stew. All the speakers are throwing a little meat in the pot. And I'm going to add a little bit to the stew, and we'll see what we get. I started drinking when I was 14 years old. I was a freshman in high school. I come from a Catholic ghetto. I'm one of 7 kids. All families that I grew up with had 7 to 10 kids. If you didn't have 7 to 10 kids, there was miscarriages or something was wrong. We had clans, friends. Families were friends of each other. You had kids, that went to school. I still live in the same town I grew up in, and I see people regularly that I went to grade school with. When I entered grade school, I was 4'11" and weighed 95 pounds, mostly mouth. When you're 4'11" and weigh 95 pounds in high school, you're kind of insecure. And I kept trying to get attention. I acted out. I tried to get people, Seemed like everybody else got to school an hour early, held a meeting, decided what to do, and I always missed the meeting. That's kind of how I felt. I used to talk about the meeting, hell of a meeting, then hoping you would discuss the meeting. The closest I got is I got to be a marginal member of the in-group. But I felt like I was there because I was being what you wanted me to be, and if I ever stopped being what you wanted me to be, you wouldn't want me there anymore. One night, a buddy and I went out, we split a fifth, and my life changed. I mean, it didn't just sort of change. It was like a sex change operation. I moved from the outer edges to the center of the group. I didn't feel like I was a member of the group. I felt like I owned it. But it really is a transformational experience. There really is we talk about moving with a sense of ease and comfort that we've never had before. I mean, that's not a small deal for a person who is as self-centered and insecure as I was. It was a big deal. I chased alcohol as hard and as fast as I could over the next 10 years of my life until I came to you. By the time I finished high school, our heroes were those Second World War guys that came back. They drank hard and played hard. They made life look easy. They had large families. They were active in their communities. They built businesses, and they were attractive men and women. And we copied them. We started drinking in high school. They had cocktail parties, bartenders. We were, so we'd get dressed up and we'd play house. And we just went out and we drank like they did in our early teens. And by the time I finished high school, I almost died of alcohol poisoning 2 or 3 times. I'd been in a couple of car accidents. I've been arrested once or twice. I thought my drinking problem was the fact I was underage. If you're underage, you get caught by the police. It doesn't matter if you had 1 drink or 10, you were in trouble. And so I got a chance to go away to school. I took that chance, and my drinking did not become normal. To make a long story short, I drank my way out of the University of Notre Dame middle of my senior year. One day I just walked out. And a bunch of things kind of have to happen to a young guy just to kind of walk out. But I had lost the ability, by this time I'm a daily drinker. I'm drinking every day. The sharp group. There will come a time in your personal development when you can have humor when it's not at the expense of another person. It's clear that point has not arrived yet. I was a class drunk. I really hated that. I started out as an A student. I ended up as a C student. By the end of it, I was in civil engineering going to school about 1 day out of 10. I just couldn't hack it anymore, and I walked out. When I walked out, I had to get a medical release. I was due to be commissioned as an officer in the Army. I got a medical release for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic when I was 19 years old. That seemed impossible to me. It seemed inappropriate, but that was the diagnosis. And I thought my alcoholism was symptomatic. I thought if I, could change the circumstances in my life, my drinking wouldn't be as bad as it was. Drinking seemed to me to be an answer, not a problem. So I came home, I finished school, and when I finished school, my father asked me to leave the house. He said, "We love you and we care about you, but you're an absolute mess, and good luck." And got a job at a liquor store. You have to use your gifts. And I got a ticket for going 80 miles an hour with a delivery truck, and I got in a little trouble at the store, lost my job, took a job as a waiter at a private club in Minneapolis. I'm living, not on Skid Row, but at $5 a night rooms, and I'm shacking up with waiters and waitresses during that. Dr Seuss, that child author? Those are actual photographs of people I lived with during the last year of my drinking. And I'm getting up in the morning, getting up at 7 o'clock. I'm taking a couple of beers, taking a couple of Dextrine. I go to work as a waiter from 10:30 to 2. At 2, I go to a bar and drink beer. At 5, I go buy a pint, and I go back and I work as a waiter from 6 to 11. And my life's an absolute mess. No one who I grew up with or my family hasn't seen me for about 6 months, and I'm going down the chutes pretty good. And one night I went to a party, and I got into a fight, and I got my face kicked in, and I got fired as a waiter because they didn't want me looking the way I was serving the food. And I was tapped. I had no place to go, so I went back home and asked my family if I could move back in the house, and they allowed that I could if I wouldn't drink, and I promised I wouldn't drink. I lied, so I got back in the house. When I went back in the house, I really tried to change my life. I think, my dad was my hero, and I was on the wrong side. It reminded me, as I was driving out to the airport to come here, I got into a fight with my youngest son. Not my best thing. I think being a parent takes 125% of whatever you have. But so your speaker is screaming at his son on the way to the airport to come share my experience, strength, and hope with you. And it reminded me of some of my interactions with my father. As much as I loved him. And all my parents wanted for me was for my life to be okay. I know that now we have 3 kids in the program, and I know the pain I caused my parents. And I think if you would have locked us in a room and had us write down what we each wanted for Bob, the list would have looked almost identical, but you could never convince my parents that what I wanted for me was what they wanted for me. It looked like I was hell-bent to tear my life apart and destroy everything that was of any meaning in it. But when I moved back in the house, I thought if I could restructure my life and change it, it wouldn't be, So I got back together with Linda, who I'd gone with for 2 or 3 years. We became engaged and remarried. And by the way, Linda just celebrated 36 years in Al-Anon. And all I want to say is there's a very fine line between detachment with love and abandonment with disgust. And you have to be very careful about which side of that line you're on. If it wasn't for that partnership, I don't think we'd be married today. My story is a little bit different. I had a lot of problems in sobriety, and I know that most of you have not. I know that as soon as you... And I think with some of those problems, Linda and I, if we had not each had a program, we would have trimmed the lasers on each other and melted each other. And because we had a program, we were able to look at our part. And I can be a pretty big horse's ass from time to time, and it really, I can remember the times when she would give me the space, when she would look at her part in an incident, even if it was only 15%, and that would give me the space to be able to take a look at my part, and that's been a great thing for us. We have 3 children that are in the program. They have 16 and 12 and 5 years of sobriety. I have turned my wife in as a carrier. None of us were alcoholic when we met her. So I got back together with Linda. We became engaged, we married. I got a job as executive trainee. I bought my first car, and I thought, wow, it's finally going to happen. All I wanted to do was be an adult. I looked around at my father's friends, and they were just, I figured if you ever got to be 40, you'd have it made. You'd be the vice president of something, and your life would be okay. Only I couldn't shut my drinking down. God, now I'm the company drunk. I use up my sick leave. But big corporations are tough places. They like to have you come in on Mondays and stay on Fridays, and I'm in trouble from the get-go. I'm falling asleep at my desk. It's not good. I had that job 6 months and I quit it. I take a sales job. I have that job about a couple of months. A buddy of mine gets married, and weddings were always good for about a week, and I got bad shape. Woke up Thursday afternoon after a long night at the Stag, and I'm in a blackout. I have these few pictures of getting into an argument and almost a fight with one of my buddies, and I hadn't been to work in 3 days. I didn't know if I had a fiance, a job, or a place to live until I was married, and that was an economic necessity. And all of a sudden, the recommendation of my father and my psychiatrist that I look into AA didn't seem like such a dumb idea, and I called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went to a cafe at 5 o'clock to go meet, or 5:30 to go meet 2 guys. I didn't know what the hell. When you're young and in trouble, you get put in front of a lot of people that try to help you. Doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, priests, bishops, nuns. And I thought they were going to interview me and come up with a bunch of recommendations. And it was an extraordinary experience. I went to this cafe and I met one guy who was 6 years and one guy who was 6 months. And they sat me down in the booth. They said, we're from AA. We had a drinking problem. We found an answer in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're here to share that story with you, and we hope it helps you. But if it doesn't help you, for some strange reason, it helps us. To share that story. So they weren't getting a toaster for signing me up. It wasn't a multi-level marketing deal. It was just a 12-step call. And they told me their stories. And with all the help, which was a lot, I had never talked to another person who had a drinking problem. And the effect on me was extraordinary. We have a lot of traditions in Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the most wonderful ones of which is that we share our experience, strength, and hope, and not just our ideas, not our ideology, not our philosophy. These men shared their life with me, and when they shared their life with me, they changed me. And that night, I went to my first meeting of AA. Another extraordinary experience. I was 23 years old, scared stiff. A vet's going to give me a test. Part of me very much didn't want to be there, and part of me was so glad that I met these 2 men that seemed to have some understanding. Everybody in my life wanted to know why. Why did you park the car in the living room? I don't know. I don't know. These men didn't want to know. They knew. They just, oh yeah, I got it. Yep. You can't believe how wonderful that is to have someone else who knows. Because I remember one time early on in AA, I said to someone, I'm not sure I'm an alcoholic. And the guy said, yeah, you might just be an asshole. Let me see, what are the explanations for why you're doing so much harm? You're either sick or you're a pretty big jerk. Before I walked in, my attitude was, people say, Bob, Bob's got a drinking problem. I didn't think I had a drinking problem. I thought I had a drinking answer. My parents would say, Bob, wouldn't you like to be? I had a sister who was, went on to graduate school at the Sorbonne, and brother was 5 at Capitol Law School, and I used to get asked, wouldn't you like to be like? I said, yeah, I like to be like my brothers and sisters. Where are the directions? How do you do that? I really would like to be like them. I'm not trying to be a jerk. It's just, I just have a natural gift. They tell me what was wrong with me was swallowing bourbon. If I ever stopped swallowing bourbon, my life would clear up. Well, just before I went back to my senior year of school, I was robbed and rolled and pistol whipped and shot at and thrown out of the second story of a hotel and ended up in an alley and ended up in a psych ward of a hospital after they patched me up and they weren't going to let me go back to school. And I talked my way out of that psych ward and ended up going back to my senior year, which I didn't finish. And when I went back, I didn't drink for almost 3 months. And my life didn't instantaneously get better. I didn't all of a sudden become what I thought you were telling me I'd become if I just wouldn't drink. I didn't become a perfect student or a great kid. I had one of the most uncomfortable 3-month periods of my life. And I thought I proved that I could quit drinking anytime I wanted to, and I thought I proved that I wasn't an alcoholic because I could quit. They say, Bob, I think you're an alcoholic. And I say, well, to me, I'd say I can see with the information you have why you think I'm an alcoholic, but there's a lot of information about me you don't have. Some of the worst times I've ever had are cold stone sober. Some of the worst behaviors I had, some of the worst thinking I had. I had a difficult time connecting all the chaos in my life to bourbon. And I showed up as 23 years old at that first meeting. And I met the man at my first meeting who is today my sponsor, who celebrated 49 years of sobriety last week and is still he's not a real fancy guy, but there couldn't have been a more perfect man for me to be matched up with in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been blessed in AA. I've been a delegate. I've done lots of different things in AA, and all I've ever done is follow him around. Pretty cool. He sat me down in a chair, and he said, Bob, alcoholism is a disease. He says it's a threefold disease. It's physical, mental, and spiritual. I can picture the chair. I can picture the night. He said, once you cross the line from problem drinking to alcoholism affects you all the time, when you're drinking and when you're not drinking. That was like rocket science. How could alcoholism affect you when you're not drinking? He said, what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, once we take our last drink and our last drug, is we use a 12-step recovery program to change, to find a different way to live. A different way to live that's sufficiently better than the way you lived before. So you don't have to go back to drugs or booze to do something for you that you're unwilling or unable to do for yourself. And if you don't change, you're doomed to go back because you don't know how to live without it. That was like the Gettysburg Address of Alcoholics Anonymous that mailman delivered to me in August of 1967 sitting in that chair. And I got right in the middle of AA and I listened to these very wise men and women, and it was like magic. I drank twice after walking in AA, once on a business trip to the West Coast. I was told to call AA. I didn't. I got drunk and I got in trouble. I came back, I was sober for 3 months, and I got married, and I got drunk on our honeymoon. We honeymooned in Mexico. You know where the divers dive off those cliffs in Mexico? I dove off those cliffs on my last drunk. I was in the audience watching a world's high diving contest. I thought, God, that's not so tough. And Alaman, the ex-president of Mexico, was there. Went over and introduced myself. His nephew had been my roommate my sophomore year in college. He was not impressed. His bodyguards were not. I was really drunk. Do not picture graceful. Picture ugly American. And I dive off the public landing, climb up the cliffs. I get up to about 85 or 90 feet, and I'm stuck. Split my swimsuit, cut my leg. Linda is going absolutely nuts. She thinks, she can see the headlines. Minnesotan brought home in a bag. And I'm up there, and I can't climb down. I mean, I am loaded. And I'm trying to decide whether to jump or dive, and I'm looking at the waves, and the waves are coming in, and I finally figured out, the hell with it, and I dove. And God watches after fools and drunks, because I made it. Norm Alfie used to talk about seconds and inches. Had I jumped, I would have died. Did not know that. If you have to get out about 30 feet to hit the channel. And if you don't, I didn't know that. Maybe I knew it intuitively, but I did not know it didactically. And we started going to Mexico for family vacations. And for about 20 years we were down there. And about our 10th anniversary, Linda gave me a picture of the chasm at La Quebrada with a picture, and it said, "There but for the grace of God." And I said, "God, honey, that was the dumbest thing I've ever done." And she said, "Bob, it's not even in the top 10. I don't know how two people could share life and see it so differently. It's just kind of a... A few years back, I was gaining some weight, and I thought I'd get in shape. I said, "Honey, I think I'm going to get a bike." She said, "Good idea." Then she got a Harley, and she used to be easier to please. This is getting tougher as I move on. So I came back, had my last week on the airplane on the way home, and now I'm in AA, and I come back, and I didn't want to go back. I was embarrassed, and she said, "Oh, for God's sakes, call Warren." So I called Warren, and I went back to the meetings, and I was accepted wonderfully well. And I thought, great. Now I'm right in the middle of AA. I've always been a guy who seemed to have a lot of potential, never was able to put it to work. And now I find out that I'm an alcoholic, and it has affected every area of my life. Well, that's great. I got the problem, and AA's got the answer. Well, if I got the problem, and AA's got the answer, I got about a half a dozen other things that are going on in my life, and if AA has the answer, those ought to clear up. And it might take 6 months or a year. Or 5 years, or 10, or 35. I was always an idealist. And so I dive in the middle. I'm going to 6 or 7 meetings a week. I'm real active. I start working the steps. So one by one, I didn't really notice my character defects. My character defects were my behavior issues, as I couldn't get up in the morning. I later found out that it had something to do with when I went to bed, but at the time I had absolutely no idea what was causing it. I had a problem with work. I had a problem going to work, getting to work, and I had a problem staying at work. Other than that, I was a pretty good worker. Except I didn't always know what to do when I was at work. I will report that. We started to have children, and I had issues with my children. I had great mother and father, but even great parents make mistakes, and I wasn't going to make the mistakes my parents made, and I didn't. I made all the mistakes my parents made, a bunch they never thought of. I was loud, impatient, angry, immature, and sometimes violent with my children. I'm not proud of that, but that's an accurate description of how I was. And I had some marital issues. I remember I used to say, the one place I didn't have many problems was my marriage, and Linda said, "Oh, yes, Bob, you did. You just didn't know it." So I report that. I had money problems. I spent $300 or $400 a month more than I made in 1967. Now, if you do that over a long period of time, you'll end up in debt. I just want to report that to you in case you don't know where that goes. And I had a gambling problem, more of a hobby. It was 4 or 5 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week is what it was. But I was making about 10 grand playing backgammon, which in 1967 was kind of a pretty good second job. And I didn't have these problems. I had all these problems in my first year of sobriety and never noticed them. My first fifth step was more a recitation of my worst behaviors and sins and the most terrible things that I had done. It was not very insightful. It was the best. I tried to do the best I could, and it was what it was. And but during my second year, one by one, I started to get my defects of character handed to me, and I started to get a pretty good list. And one by one, I would take these things on and try to deal with them and get my life more manageable, and I would regularly fail. And these were not annual problems or quarterly problems. These were daily problems. And they were, I had a pretty good list by the end of my second year. My third year, I'm not making as much progress as I want. My fourth and fifth year, they're bothering the hell out of me. My sixth and seventh year, they're eating my lunch. And by my eighth year, I am in deep trouble. I'm telling you that I thought I have always been a great starter. I just don't finish anything. I don't finish Notre Dame. I don't finish the Catholic Church. I don't finish my family. I don't finish my job. I interview well. I just don't know how to work. They had to get prizes for interviewing. And early on in AA, everybody's patting me on my head, telling me what a good job I am. In 6 and 7 years, I am dying. I'm in as much debt at 7 years of sobriety as I was in my first year. I paid all my bills off, and I'm back in debt at 7 years. I'm in trouble at work. I'm in trouble at home. I was unhappy. You got me just well enough to dislike myself intensely, is kind of how it was. And I'm thinking, everybody's saying you're doing a good job, and I'm saying, God, can't you see? I am dying. I'm telling my sponsor about 60% of what's going on. Now, I know here you tell your sponsor everything. And I congratulate you for that. But you know the truth? I was only telling myself 60%. I wasn't up to being able to take a look at what was going on in my own life. Between denial and suppression, I wasn't able to accurately take a look and see what was going on in my own life. And I am a deep doo-doo. And the two things that have saved my bacon are my big mouth, which I generally end up telling people what's going on in my life, and the other was the old-timers and the models that I had, my heroes in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a lot of people around me who had very good programs and were doing a good job putting the principles in action in their lives. And I knew what I had to do. I had to find out what God had to do on Wednesday. Because I'm doing the steps. I have done 2 fifth steps. We are very active in doing the steps, and I'm sponsoring people. I'm active in service. I'm starting to give talks, and I'm dying. I don't have enough time to give you. I don't want to give you the impression my early sobriety was horrible. I wouldn't go back. It was wonderful, but I had an increasing sense of dissatisfaction with myself in my early, middle sobriety. And when I got to 8 years, trust me, I was in trouble. I knew what the answer was. The answer was to find God. The problem was I'm going to go to God, knock on the door. God's going to say, who there? I'm going to say, God, it's Bob. He's going to say, what do you want? I said, I want some help, baby. I am dying. I said, I'm 8 years sober, and my pants are on fire, and I need help. And he's going to say, okay, I'll take you on. And I'm going to say what all people in trouble say. What do I do? And God's going to say, stop gambling. Get up in the morning. Go to work. Stay at work. Work at work. God's going to say, be kind and loving to your children and be kind and loving to your wife. Do not spend more money than you make. I'm going to say, hell, if I could do all those things, I wouldn't need God. So what the hell is the use of having a relationship with God if you can't fulfill the conditions of the relationship? Not a joke. My idea was as soon as I clean my act up, I'll go develop a relationship. But it's pretty hard to develop a relationship when you can't fulfill the conditions of the relationship, or the conditions that I perceived were in the relationship. And I was stuck in that spot for about 2 years. And then you're at that point where you're kind of going to flip a coin, commit suicide or call your sponsor. You're really not sure what you should do. And I went and turned myself in, and I went back to the steps. I went back to the steps with a ferocity that I hadn't been at them for a while. I took step 1, and I found out what powerlessness and unmanageability meant to me 8 years sober. Not very hard to find out. I was clearly unmanageable, and boy, I was an unhappy camper. And I was as powerless as I've ever been in my life. The step that threw me was step 2. Came to believe the power greater than ourselves will restore us to sanity. I believe step 2 for us, but I had lost the belief in it for me. Because I'm 8 years sober and my life's going backwards. I'm on a down escalator walking up. Every time I take a breath, I lose 3 steps. I look like I'm doing okay from the outside, and from the inside, I am dying. I am as unhappy at 8 years of sobriety as I was when I walked in the front door of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am dying. And I had to come to believe. I think when you're in trouble, you get more active or less active. And I started to look around, and I saw people with larger problems than me, with smiles on their faces, with greater dignity, walking through walls that I was trying to avoid. And from watching those people, I came to believe that a power greater than me would restore me to sanity. I took step 3 on my knee with my sponsor in his office. We didn't do that much in those days. I know that it's done more often today, but it was awkward, embarrassing, and I had not ever done that. But this time I thought, hell, I'm going to dot the I's and cross the T's. I did my third four-step. I went to him and I said, when you're done, I said, when we're done with this, I said, I'm going to do anything you tell me to do, so be careful. I said, I feel like I'm dying of thirst lying next to a lake. I said, I feel like I know what to do, I just can't do it. I said, I feel like I'm separated by a plastic wall. I said, you give me a test and ask me what to do, I could pass the test, I could tell you what to do, I just can't do it. And I said, I don't want to miss out. I don't want this to be one more great start and a poor finish. I really want to go through it. I took my fifth step, and when I was done with that, one of the things he wanted me to do was go to a psychologist. I thought that was an admission of failure of my program. Hello? And I didn't want to go. I just didn't want to go. But I had a lot of problems around money, failure, success, and work. My father was a successful man. I thought I'll never be as good as my old man. I had a lot of issues around that, and he wanted me to get some help. So I went to a psychologist, and he said, can you get your parents involved? I said, no. I said, my parents have been over-involved in my life, and if you can't help me without getting my parents involved, please refer me to someone who can. He said, well, you get your wife involved. I thought, oh, crap. Well, they see things so differently. Maybe more honestly, can you get your kids involved? And I thought, well, they're pretty young. I don't know why the hell you want them. And I did not want them because I was sometimes violent with my children, and I was embarrassed about that, and I didn't want that. But I did. And I can remember I was in there with maybe the seventh or eighth visit, and I'm in deep trouble at work. My company's going down the chute, and I don't know why I'm busting my ass 2 or 3 hours a day, and it's just I'm really. But it's not working. And the psychologist looked at me and he said, why are you so afraid of failure? And I wanted to pull his nose right off his face. And I said, look, you're a doctor. I said, when you fail or, you've got a problem, you go bankrupt. I said, you just take your little sign, take it off the door, walk down the hall, pound it on another door, and within a year you're making $100,000 again. I said, I'm about to go bankrupt. They're going to put my name in the paper. I've lived here all my life. I'm in the investment business, and I'm about to lose everything I have. Nod your head up and down if you understand that. So I'm going to lose everything I have. And he looked at my wife, and he said, Linda, if Bob loses everything he had, will he lose you? My wife said, no, won't lose me. He looked at my 2 young children, and he said, if your father loses everything he has, will he lose you? And the kids said, no. If you can't lose, you can't play. And in that moment, I got in touch with fear. I've done 3 inventories in AA at that point, and fear had to do with dogs and high buildings and snakes. Not very insightful. And in that moment, I discovered that I had been swimming in fear. That I'm afraid of being a husband. I'm afraid of the responsibility of being a husband. I'm afraid of being a father. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of success. I can't tell you how afraid I was. I'm a salesman who never made any sales calls. I just phoned up activity reports. I didn't even give you the chance that you'd grab me by the throat and drag me over the desk and force me to sell you something. I just never showed up. And it was like a revelation. If we were going to have a marathon or a race, a foot race, when I showed up for the race, I would be a guy with a good running suit, with great running shoes, and I'd look and talk and act like a runner. And I tell you that I won some race in Minnesota, and you'd expect for the first part of the race, or for the race, that I'd be in the top 10. When the race would take off, I'd be in the top 10 for about the first third of the race, but somewhere between a third and halfway through the race, I'd fall down, hurt myself, and I wouldn't finish the race. And when the race was done, someone would say, what happened to that guy from Minnesota? Pretty good runner. I think he won some race. I must have pulled a hamstring or something. But if you would have followed me around in my life in a helicopter, you would have been able to guess within 50 feet of when I would have stopped running, because I don't finish anything. And I'll tell you, it gets old. It gets old not to be able to use your gifts. It gets old to be able to have talents and never to put them to use over a period of time. It gets old hurting the people in your life that rely on you. It gets old never getting to be who you were supposed to be in the business of your own life. One of the things that I learned about myself, and I have since learned about some of the people I sponsor, is that most of us have a paradigm of survival. And that, the guys that I sponsor, if they need $35,000 to live, they always make $35,000. If they accidentally make $25,000 in the first half of the year, they slow their income down. So by the end of the year, they end up at 35. And they don't know why that happens. They think that they've had a couple of months where they made 10 grand, so they think they're $120,000 guys. But if you take their tax returns over the last year, you'll find out that they made $35,001 each of the last 12 years. And they don't even know that they have this period. It takes almost like an act of God, an opening, to be able to break through some of those structures that we have in our lives that are absolutely invisible. I remember after dealing with that psychologist, I went home. I had one of the worst days I've ever had in AA. I went to work late. I left early. I got in the backgammon game. I won $800. I missed dinner. I missed the AA meeting. I came home. I got a fight with my wife, and I slapped one of the kids. One of those days you'd like to have videotaped and sent to the General Service Office to show what 8 years of sobriety can do. And I said, gee, it happened. And I said, it happened again. Weren't you there? And I said, yeah, I was there, but it's so habitual. It's almost like I don't have to think. It's like I go into a blackout, and all of a sudden I realize that was a bunch of hooey. That my life was the way it was because I designed it the way it was. I sounded like a guy who wanted to quit gambling, and what I was, it was the guy who wanted to gamble whenever the hell I wanted to gamble for as much money as I wanted to gamble and not have problems because of gambling. I wanted my wife's and children's love and affection without spending time with them. I wanted money without work. Not a very good design. And at that moment, for whatever reason, I realized that I had tried pretty darn hard to change my life, and it failed abjectly. And for whatever reason, it seemed okay, and I was given the permission to take the 6th and the 7th step of the program of AA. The 6th step said that we were fairly ready to have God who would be different to character. The 7th step said that we humbly have to remove our shortcomings. I have spent 8 years trying to get rid of them. I don't have the power to get rid of them. I'm a pipe, not the well. It happens through me, not by me. I'm responsible, but I do not... A doctor doesn't heal. He creates an aseptic environment, creates an atmosphere where healing can take place, and God heals. A farmer doesn't grow. He plants a seed. He creates a fertile environment. Growth can take place, and God grows. And we don't change. We create an atmosphere in which change can take place, and God changes us. And that night, out of fear of getting drunk, but mostly out of fear of continuing to be a sober jerk, I was so tired of being a sober jerk. I got down on my knees, and I took the 6th and the 7th step, and 4 of the major problems I was dealing with went out of my life that night, such as the power of God and such as the power of the program. Now, I'm a guy, and I knew I had to put some structure in place to support that, because I'm a guy, when I go on a diet, I go buy a bag of cookies and a quart of ice cream. It's already been a bad day. I'm just going to finish out today. I'm probably never going to have ice cream again. I'm just, I'm... And I had ego and money problems, and I turned the checkbook over to my wife, and I put myself on an allowance, and within about a year, she had us out of financial difficulty. She had this deal where she could pay a third of a bill, the damnedest thing I've ever seen. I spent hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars trying to learn how to be a better parent. I have a great relationship with our children today, usually. But wouldn't it be a hell of a deal if we had 3 kids that were alcoholic, and they didn't want to go to AA because of what an ass their father was? Mr. AA, Mr. Talker in AA. Wouldn't that could have happened? I promise you that could have happened. I've seen it happen. I am so, being a great AA member is not just the merit badges you get in AA. It isn't just how many people you sponsor, or how many meetings you go to, or how many talks you give, or, It is how you do in the firing line of life. I think you should be able to go to your spouse, or you should be able to go to your boss, or you should be able to go to your neighbor, you should be able to go to your kids, or you should be able to go to your parents and say, has recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous made this person a better person in your life? And I think that is an equal, if not better measure of how our programs are, is how it shows. AA is not to separate us and have the measure only be how we are in meetings. It is to return us to life. It is to give us the abundance of life. It is to give us life more fully. And it works. It works, And I'll tell you, it's embarrassing sometimes to have to tell on yourself and to tell the truth and to deal with the issues in your life. It's not easy, and I'll talk about that in my last part of my talk. And I started to date my wife. I've dated my wife for 25 years every Friday night. When I'm gone, we do it, and it was a real live, dangerous date. No one else went out on that date for us. And it was one of the best things we've ever done for each other because we knew that one night a week we had each other's undivided attention. And my activity in AA had gotten to be an issue in our home because I was hyperactive in Alcoholics Anonymous. It ate into how I was as a parent, and it ate into how I was as a father. There were some benefits to that, and there were some detriments to that. Have my family suffered because of my activity in AA? Yes. Has my family benefited because of my recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous and my activity in AA? Yes. Are there some conflicts in that from time to time? And do I always make the right choice? No. But I've got more balance in my life today than I've ever had, and we've worked those issues out, and we love each other, and we've got a pretty good deal going. And for the next 10 years, my life took off like it was on a rocket ship. The guy that didn't know how to work was in the real estate investment business. I started to make enough money to burn a wet elephant. I bought the big house. I bought 2 Mercedes. I bought everything, paid cash for them, thought I was doing good. And I'll tell you, there's problems with failure. There's problems with success. All of a sudden, I think God's blessing me because I'm such a wonderful son of a bitch. And driving up to the meeting in my Mercedes and my, $1,000 suit and no underwear. And how would you like to go to meetings with me? And then in 1986, they passed the Tax Act, and we had a real estate failure. And over the next 3 years, I lost $8 million and gained 40 pounds. I was going to write a book about that, but I couldn't find a publisher. And once again, I was faced with me, and I'm back going broke, and I am dying. And I'm 23 years sober, and I'm, facing bankruptcy. We have to sell the car, sell the big house. My middle boy came home from college and got drunk, got arrested for drunken driving, totaled on an automobile, ended up in detox, and he's in treatment. It was his Christmas present to my mother and myself. And we'd go to that halfway house for meetings once a week, and I'd start crying when the meeting started. I could just see those guys say, how would you like to have what he has? 23 years sober. I think he's got the clap. I don't know what the hell's on. And when you're in deep trouble, and I was in deep trouble, I had to learn, I got more active. I went to a man and I asked him to be my spiritual director. I just talked to him before I came over here tonight. And I remember when I went to him, he said, Bob, what do you want from me? And I said, well, there's a man by the name of Bob White who was my mentor. And I said, I said, I am so competitive. I'm always trying to be brighter, wealthier, and do better than people around. I said, I want to stop being competitive. I want to be a lover. When people are around this man, they feel better about themselves, and I would like people to feel better about themselves when they're around me. And I said, the other thing, I'd like to be less materialistic. Within about 6 weeks, I started to lose everything I had. I said, we got to talk. And I said, there might be some confusion. I said, what I want is I want to be able to keep the stuff and be less materialistic. We laugh about that, but that was... Today, I would not trade the money for the lesson. I take the money and the lesson. I had to find out who I was without my money. I don't think God had the real estate collapse to teach me a lesson, but I think within every great phenomenon, there is a personal lesson with every situation in their life, there was something I had to learn, and one of the things I still struggle with is materialism. And I had to find out who I was with money and I've been both places, and it is far more the same than it is different. And I've gotten out of that, and today my life is back more in balance. I've lived 35 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've lived 23 years prior to coming that. My life's been pretty easy. I was born on third base. I've been congratulating myself for hitting a triple. I had a great mother and father, had a great education, had a great head start. But I had alcoholism, and I wasn't able to do much with it. And then I got sober, and out of necessity to maintain my sobriety, I have been forced to put principles into action. I've been forced to put principles into action in my life, which has given my life a texture and substance that I don't think my life ever would have had without my alcoholism. My life is far better because of my alcoholism. I think I'm a better man. I think I'm a better husband. I think I'm a better man. The journey is so different than I ever expected it to be. If I sound like I'm wise, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've got a sponsor that I work with, and I do the steps. And over a long period of time like that, and I'm a pretty active member of AA, you go to thousands of meetings and you get gifts thrown at you all the time. Ideas, little proddings, one of the reasons I still talk, it used to be more of an ego thing, and still from time to time is that mostly it's a service thing, and I get to go out and I get to hear other people talk, and it encourages me to remain to be an active member of AA. It keeps me more vital. Change is the name of the game. Sobriety, not abstinence. One of the things I've learned, if you would have asked me, and I'm not asking anybody to raise their hand, but I would have said, if I asked everybody in the room to raise their hand, if I said how many people would like to get rid of the things that cause them problems in their lives and hurt the people they love, I think almost everybody would say yes. I believe that's not so. Or at least I believe that we're conflicted about that, sorely conflicted. When I was young in AA, I would try and fail to change the things in my life that didn't work. I'd try and fail, but I still was able to grow. But there comes a time in AA where you've got to change or you stop growing. That, for me, happened around 8 years. I think the event that happened to me around 8 years is an event that happens to many people in middle sobriety. It's not an unusual thing. The fact is that we have kind of a second surrender, that when we come in, we have this profound surrender, and we identify the things that we think God and the program are asking us to do, and most of us are wonderfully successful in changing those things in early sobriety. But there's a lot more work to do, and most of us never identified that work that there is to do. There's a lot more issues that we have to deal with, and most of us had no idea what the hell those issues were. And the universe gave us those issues and presented them back to us, and little by little, they were pushed up against our nose, and many of us at that point in time left Alcoholics Anonymous or got loaded. I can't tell you how many people over the years that come up to me and say, I was where you were and I went out. So I think that many of us, so if you're having trouble and you're in that middle period of sobriety and your life really feels like it's going backwards, I think in some ways when you take a trip, part of the travel is what you run into, what's in your way, what you have to deal with. And I think a spiritual journey is what was presented to me, what was in my way of my spiritual journey, what was in the way to getting my life together. And I've always thought that I wanted to get rid of the things and change. The fact is I was scared to death of change. Okay? There was a guy who wrote a book called Scott Peck called The Road Less Traveled, and later he wrote another book called Further Along the Road Less Traveled. And in that book he talked about the 5 stages of death and dying: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Denial is maybe I don't have cancer, I get a second opinion. Anger is why is this happening to me? Bargaining is God, please remove this and I'll become your servant. And depression, and I'm not trying to play doctor, not a clinical depression, it's a depression appropriate to the circumstance. And then he says an interesting thing, but if you allow depression to do its work, which in my experience is to grind the ego to dust, you go through depression into acceptance. And he says, interestingly enough, those are the stages we go through in the major changes of our life. And I have found that when I've had to go through changes in my life, I have gone through those stages in my life. And he said, we assume that most people go through those 5 stages when they're dying. They don't. They go through denial, anger, bargaining, but when they get to the depression, the pain's so great, they back off and go recycle into the first 3, and they never go through depression into acceptance. So some of the pain we experience in our sobriety, I think, is a God-given pain. I think it's the universe trying to say, change. It doesn't feel like change, so it feels like death. We so identify today with who we are. We so identify the problems in our lives. We so identify with our stories that many of us won't give up our story. Pretend I'm sponsoring a 35-year-old guy who's married with kids and trying to do a 5th step, and he's having trouble with the book, with the columns. And I'm saying, hey, that's tough, kind of complex, difficult. Don't worry about that. Get your wife and your kids, your mom and dad, your brothers and sisters, your neighbor, your boss, a couple of co-workers, and a couple of guys from your A group, and bring them over to the house. And then I want you to serve coffee, and here's what I want you to say. We have a step in AA where we try to get in touch with our defective character, and I am having trouble identifying them. And I was wondering if you'd help. And then hand out the tablets and leave. You'd have a pretty good start. A better start than you'd think. But you know, most of us wouldn't call that meeting. You know why? We don't want to change. But it's one deeper than that. We don't even want to know. You get to a certain point and you train the people in your life about what they can talk about and what they can't talk about. You train your wife. We're not talking about that. Nod your head up and down. We're not having that conversation. We are not. You want to have that conversation? It's going to be a very expensive. We're not having that conversation. You train your coworkers. You train your kids. You train your sponsor. You train the guys in the work. You make deals. You get to a certain point where you say, when you get to that V in the road at 8 to 10 years of sobriety where you either got to change or you stop growing, when you stop growing, you start hanging out with people who also have stopped growing. Chasers hang out with the chasers, gamblers hang out with the gambler, you make a deal. I won't call you on your crap, you don't call me on mine. We'll discuss the steps, we'll discuss the traditions, we'll go to meetings. You stay out of my face, I'll stay out of yours. Deal? Bad deal. You better get some people in your life. I'm saying if my life really got out of whack, I think Dick Martin would call me up. I think Frank M. would call me up. I think Jerry J. would call me up. I got about a half a dozen guys that would be on my case. If it got seriously out of whack, I think they'd be calling me up saying, Bob, we need to talk. The deal I got is if you see me seriously out of whack, would you please talk to me? Change is simply change. It isn't dying. It isn't who we are. It is what we do. It is just behavior. You can change your political party, you can change your behavior, and it isn't who you are. The changes in AA, there's so much teaching today about the 12 steps. When you go on, I'm going to do 5 more minutes of the stuff. You go in there, and there's a dozen tapes on people talking about the steps. And we have more teaching on the steps than we have ever had, and I think that's almost entirely good. But I'll tell you something. There's sometimes an impression that the steps are mechanical. That all you have to do is know 164 pages and your life's going to be okay. And I'll tell you something. I think that's simplistic. I think it's spiritual materialism. And please don't hear me say that our big book doesn't work. Please don't hear me say that the power of the steps are not enough. The steps are just fine. We will never exhaust the spiritual depth of those steps if we practice them for the next 100 years. But just using the words, just memorize. There are people who have memorized the menu that are starving to death. They talk like they know the damn menu, but I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to go on a fishing trip with them. I wouldn't want to trade line with them. There's something you have to bring to the steps.
Because if the steps are mechanical, every time you got a problem, all you have to do is go to the third step and stay it and click your heels, you'd be back in Kansas. I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, if it was that simple, wouldn't we all be back in Kansas? It isn't that simple. The process of change in the program isn't so much about doing as it is about a change in being, who we are, not what we do, who we are. When you change who you are, what you do flows out of that automatically. There is some way about how we have to be in the process of taking those steps. Because it's of God, it is hard to explain, and I can't put it in words because I don't own it. But I know it has something to do with humility. I know it has something to do with, I know the answer is surrender. I remember Chuck one time to talk to that Peachtree conference in Georgia where all the experts in alcoholism was, and they were going to go ahead and talk, and he went and he talked, and he came back, and someone asked him how the conference was, and he said, great. He said, what do you think about all the experts in alcoholism? And he turned around and he said, they don't know much about surrender. The answer is surrender. But a guy comes over to your house, how do you tell him to surrender? That's the answer. So there's a humility, an honesty, a commitment. There's a way of being in that process that is spiritual and it's magical and it's of God. And I think doing the steps mechanically are better than not doing them at all, and I do them mechanically from time to time, I promise you. But there's nothing to compare about it when you bring it in and you bring the right juice to the process of taking those steps when you're really ready to have God bring something to your life that you're unable to bring it, and you act like that pipe and it goes through you. And I'm telling you, baby, this program is just it is the most powerful, wonderful process. Thank you for my life, and thank you for this weekend.